The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is now 10 minutes after 8. Good morning to you. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well then, on Friday, Standard & Poor's downgraded South Africa's sovereign credit rating and warned that the strikes in this country's mining sector will likely feed into the political debate in the run-up to the 2014 elections, which may increase uncertainties related to the African National Congress's future policy framework. The rating agency also said it expects South Africa's underlying social tensions to increase government spending pressure and also reduce its fiscal flexibility. Well, to talk to us about these matters, let's welcome on our lines now our Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan. A very good morning to you, sir. I thank you for your time.
Good morning, Xolani, and good morning to your listeners.
Thanks indeed. Also joining us this morning is Dr. Stephen Friedman, is a political analyst. Dr. Friedman, nice talking to you again.
Hi, good morning, Xolani.
Thank you. Let me start with the Finance Minister. Finance Minister, were you surprised at Friday's rating downgrade by Standard & Poor's?
Surprised in the sense that it was unscheduled, and the way we learnt about this was I was at these annual meetings in Tokyo and had scheduled meetings with all three of the agencies of the four that do ratings for South Africa. And when meeting S&P, they suddenly tell us that in fact they are going to emerge with new ratings. So yes, it was a surprise. They didn't stick to the schedule that they were supposed to. By contrast, for example, I also met Fitch, and Fitch are due to visit South Africa in November. They reassured us that they would stick to their schedule, that they would wait for the medium-term budget policy statement and for the Mangaung conference of the ANC to be concluded, and then they'll give their view to us in January. So, yes, in that sense, it was a surprise. I thought the public should know some of the context and the way this has happened.
Sure. But having said that, and there was an article yesterday quoting Deputy Central Governor Daniel Minele, who said in that Reuters article that, yes, it is disappointing, but some of the criticism by Standard & Poor's is pretty valid.
I don't know, valid in the extent that if you say that there might be uncertainties about what the ANC's conference is going to emerge with, well, obviously, because the conference hasn't concluded yet. And there's still a policy debate happening. If you say there's uncertainty about who might emerge as the new president of the ANC, Mr. Zuma or anybody else, well, that's also self-evident because the conference hasn't been concluded yet. And the competitive process is still taking place. If, on the other hand, some of the stuff that you've been quoting, which says that there could be fiscal impact because of some of these phenomena, there we would disagree, and all we would say is wait until next Thursday. Let us tell the nation what we think the fiscal framework should be, as agreed by Cabinet on the 10th of October last week. And as we've demonstrated for many years in South Africa, we will demonstrate again that we will work within the realities of the situation.
But again, the validity comes out of the fact that they talk, for instance, about the growth prospects for our economy. In fact, they've even gone as far as saying that, I'm going to read here from their statement. They say, due to the production losses, S&P now expects GDP growth to soften to not more than 2.5% in 2012, and the current account deficit to increase to at least 5.1% now. The very same deputy governor that I spoke about said in an article that growth forecasts will most likely need to be revisited. Isn't that valid? That because of the problems that we've seen not only in the mining sector but transport as well and elsewhere in this economy, we may have to revise growth.
Oh, but we've been saying that for months. So somebody hasn't been reading or listening.
Sure.
I've been saying that here for months. And it's a self-evident truth that the situation globally isn't improving much. If at all, and the Tokyo meetings just make it worse for us in the sense that there's no glimmer of hope emerging from there. And secondly, we've also said, also very openly, that the recent events in South Africa are going to damage exports for a start. They're going to have implications for the current account deficit. They're going to have implications for revenue, and they're going to have implications for growth. So the Deputy Governor is absolutely in tune with what all of us have been saying for some time now.
So if then we should expect these changes in this economy, they are then right to say that perhaps when we go to these conferences, people will start making populist calls about how we should deal with these matters.
Well, there are so-called populist calls all over the world. We're not unique, and when you travel around, you begin to actually see that. And finally, the test, both of the ANC and of the government, is not to worry so much about the populist calls as much as to redouble our efforts to make a meaningful difference in the lives of the majority of South Africans, to make sure that as government we deliver upon the programs that we've agreed upon, and that would improve informal settlements, that would improve the ability to access water, electricity, and sanitation, that will ensure that our children who go to school get quality education, that our health services actually work. And it's those areas that we need to make work better. But finally, it's not just government that needs to work differently and better. All of us as South Africans need to recognize that there are huge deficits in our society.
Sure.
And all of us have a contribution to make. And one of the challenges with the way in which some of us have these public discourses is everything comes to the door of government. Now, where are the other social actors? What responsibilities and roles do they have? What do ordinary South African citizens have as their responsibility? Mm-hmm. Because the middle-class South Africans, or whatever background they come from, must recognize that their middle-class status is a privileged status in South Africa. And there are many who are not as privileged as them. And that for the next 10 or 15 years, we'll all have to make some sacrifices, just as we did to get up to apartheid,
sure,
in order to improve the situation for the majority in South Africa.
And again, Dr. Friedman, I'm going to bring you in a minute. But Minister, in order for everybody in South Africa then to march and take that particular line, somebody's got to lead. David Ward, in responding to the S&P downgrade, said over the weekend that we are being punished, rightfully so, for weak political and uncertainties around leadership, he said.
That again is another area that I'm sure Stephen Friedman would be better qualified to comment on. But my own view, for what it's worth, is that leadership doesn't just reside in one place in society. That each sector of our society has a role and a responsibility to, inverted commas, take the lead. So if we're talking about the business sector in South Africa, you can't say government must lead business. Business must provide leadership. If you're talking about the labor sector in South Africa, same thing. In civil society, the same thing.
Sure.
So my conception of leadership is very different. It's one which says that leadership lies all over in our society, and each of us that have something to do with the economy, with improving the lives of people, and changing the economic trajectory of our society need to be activated and make a difference in the short term and in the medium term.
All right. Dr. Friedman, then your thoughts on this comment, particularly by David Ward, about us being punished, rightfully so, for a lack of political leadership?
Well, Kolani, I think it's part of a myth which is circulating in the society at the moment, which incidentally the rating agencies seem to buy into. And that myth, as the Minister has just implied, is that all our problems are simply the fact that we happen to be governed by a particular group of people. Now, clearly this is false. Government has a responsibility. Of course, government has a responsibility. And we as citizens need to hold government to account for that responsibility. But government is not the only institution that has power in this society. We have massive corporations which have power. We have labor unions which have power. We have professional associations which have power. We have media which have power. And all of those power holders have a responsibility for what happens in our economy. It's not just business. So, we have this endless argument in this country which simply implies that somehow if the people who were governing us went away and they were replaced by some other people, then suddenly we would live happily ever after. That's clearly not true. And as I said before, that doesn't for one moment say that government must be let off the hook. Obviously, it shares responsibility for what happens in the society. But I think we also need to put what's happening with the rating agencies into context here.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it needs to be said, and really I'm not arguing for complacency here, there is an inbuilt bias in the rating agencies at the moment, which we need to be aware of. And the bias is this, that a few years ago, the rating agencies, quite correctly in many people's view, got wrapped over the knuckles and their credibility was damaged because they allowed all sorts of borrowers a free ride. And we had the global financial crisis, and they had to take part of the responsibility for that because they were giving green lights to people who shouldn't have been given green lights. Obviously, what they're doing now, all over the world, is overreacting and giving red lights whenever they can see it. And, we need to be aware, we're not the only country to be downgraded. I mean, there's a sort of festival of downgrading going on all around the world.
But Dr. Friedman, do you think in this country, is it overreacting? I mean, let's take one company, Amplatz. They were reporting, I think, last week sometime that they've lost over R1 billion as a result of the strike. Some may say, well, they have serious reason to be concerned about what's going on in this economy.
Well, I'm not minimizing that, Kolani, but look, let me say first of all that every time we have strikes in this country, people produce these, and I haven't looked at the Amplatz figure, but people produce these rather wild calculations of how much was lost, which only tell one part of the story. And obviously I'm not saying that strikes are good for us, but what I'm saying is that this constant hand-wringing which says that every time we have a strike we lose billions ignores the fact in the case of platinum that the stuff is still in the ground, it hasn't gone anywhere, people are going to be mining it over the next while or so, and that will reduce the costs. So I think I'm not saying we should minimize it, I think we should have a sense of perspective. But I think the other point which needs to be brought home very clearly is that I think also behind the thinking of the rating agencies and a lot of South Africans, or certainly South Africans who influence the debate, is a particular view of how this country operates, which is not accurate. It's a view which says that, look, deep down, there are millions of savage people in this country who don't understand the way the market economy works, who are just itching to get their hands on the property of wealthy people, and that it's the job of the government to keep them in check. Our problem in this country is not poor people. Our problem is middle-class people. Poor people have a very pragmatic and sensible and rational view of how you operate in the economy. It's very often the middle-class people who don't, and the middle-class people need to take responsibility for that.
Okay.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, please come in, Minister.
I think Stephen has made two very important points that I want to reinforce. Mm-hmm. And we've got to do a lot more to keep our public better informed rather than just repeat in a sheepish way what somebody says yesterday and then repeat it today. The one is worldviews, right? Each of us in our writings, in our thought processes represent a particular set of values and a particular set of biases and a particular set of interests. And what I think would be very helpful in the interest of democracy is when people speak either as economists or anything else, they must declare their worldview. Because there are different worldviews that, in a sense, for example, in the most sharp way, are clashing in the United States election. Right? The one worldview is minimal state, no increases in taxes, decrease revenue over a time, leave it to subnational entities and indeed the elites in America to decide what should actually happen. Another worldview which says the state has an important role to play. It requires the fiscal space to actually play that role, and that it needs to do it in a sustainable way, but if necessary, it must raise taxes on the upper classes of society. Now, in no way in South Africa do we so sharply project and convey this clash of worldviews, right? Rather, we chant out conventional logic, which is very unhelpful and confusing for members of the public who might not be in tune with what is going on. And of course, there'll be phone calls just now would say all of this is nonsense, but that's the truth of the matter. The second is the point about ratings agencies. Why do we ask for either a company or a country to be rated? We ask to be rated in order that a so-called independent agency can say, are we creditworthy? Do we have the ability to pay our debt if we borrow? Mm-hmm. And are we on an unsustainable debt trajectory? We are creditworthy as South Africa. the ratings agencies went out of their way to assure me, although we've downgraded you, you are still investment grade. Let's not forget that in the context of what we're saying. And we are not on an unsustainable debt trajectory. But compare ourselves to most parts of the world, we're not. And that part gets lost in the gloom and doom around some of these stories.
Sure, but it's quite important that you say there are nowhere where you see these stark differences in ideologies, even opinions about how to deal with these matters than here in South Africa. Because I'm looking at a comment by Jill Marcus, our Reserve Bank governor, who says in response to what has happened that government has to address the real issues raised by the rating agencies. Some in our societies, in very important positions, actually agree with what the ratings agencies are saying.
No. What Ms. Marcus is saying is that, for example, there is a set of strikes in South Africa. Resolve them. There are underlying factors that have given rise to those strikes, which are social.
Yeah.
They are, what do you want to call it, in relation to the living conditions of people, in relation to the migrant labor system, they're in relation to the way in which wages are structured in the mining industry. Work with them and make sure that we remove the underlying causes, both as government and as companies, and indeed as labor as well. So, I've got no argument with that. We must recognize that. But it doesn't need a ratings agency to come and tell us that. We know that these are some of the challenges, and we know that collectively as South Africans, we need to command the will to change some of these things and understand the underlying phenomena. And that's why the President took the initiative to bring different role players in South Africa together last Friday, and has had other interactions before, both through himself and through ministers in government for weeks before that, leading up to that particular meeting. So government has been engaged, but we don't have to say things publicly about how we're intervening or whom we are talking to or how we are trying to understand the situation. But I can assure the public that there are many ministers in government who've been fully engaged with this matter and trying to move the situation towards tranquility.
Okay.
It'll take us a bit more time, but we should listen to what you're saying, which is understand the underlying causes and deal with them in an assertive way.
All right, let me take a commercial break and we'll open the lines again then for South Africans to air their views on these matters. 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208, but also we'll look at some of the reasons raised by S&P then in relation to their decision to downgrade South Africa on this matter. 0891 104 208, I'll take emails at gwala@sabc.co.za.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
My guest on the program this morning, Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, as well as Dr. Stephen Friedman. We're talking about the Standard & Poor's downgrade of South Africa's sovereign credit rating. It happened on Friday. They then cited a number of reasons and would like to hear your thoughts then on this on 0891 104 208. I'll go to the lines in a minute. Thank you very much, Sigi. We're going to the lines then on 0891 104 208. There's Solin Limpopo, Jeffrey in Claremont, Gift in Eastern Cape, Mvusiwe Kaya and Lady Grey, not particularly in that order. But let me tell you about some of the SMSs that have come through here. There is a lot of them actually talking about the middle class. The middle class is South Africa's goose that lays the golden egg. Why try to kill it? An SMS not signed. Another one says, to do away with the middle class, we would become a communist country just like your two guests want. That's Ethel in Durban. The other one says, the middle class pays South Africa. Privilege, There is another one that says, Pravin says, being a middle class citizen in South Africa is a privilege. He just put a negative kick into SA ratings. Please define who are the middle class and how are they to contribute? Are they being taxed? That's Jen in Howick. Let me go to Jeffrey in Claremont first. Good morning, Jeff.
I just want to say that I'm sick and tired of hearing people like this communist Stephen Friedman and the minister keep on trying to shift the blame of the current state of the nation into big business and others. Taxpayers are sick and tired of wasting money on corrupt officials, bad business, and before you sort that out, there's nothing you can do. And they must accept blame because you can't solve the problem. Government has to sort out its own finances and the way it spends money and the way it controls its departments. Otherwise, it's an endless pit. And really, it's enough There must be other people than Stephen Friedman that SABC can get.
Well, I mean, you know what? I wouldn't like us to start labeling people as communists and so on, because we don't really know that. We don't know that. But if you're challenging a view, challenge a view. Yes, Stephen?
Stephen Friedman, he can never have a good word about...
Okay,
according to him,
Jeffrey.
only the ANC can do things.
All right, Jeffrey.
The opposition has got no role, despite the fact that they're gaining on good governance. And really, we're tired of people like him. There must be other analysts or commentators that you can get.
Well,
Thanks,
I mean, okay, Jeffrey in Claremont. Stephen, do you want to respond?
Jeffrey, with great respect, I thought we left giving people tags behind with the old South Africa. And clearly, some of us remain unreconstructed. And if you listen carefully, nothing I've said says the sole responsibility lies with big business. I said all of us need to share the responsibility. And never have I said that we must allow for the kind of corruption that goes on to carry on. In fact, the contrary has been my argument. And what I'm asking for is more role players in society to help us to actually do that and change this culture in South Africa. So it's a great pity that we have people with Jeff's mindset in a modern-day country where labels shouldn't be the issue. A diversity of views is what we actually require, because it's the old thinking that got South Africa into the mess that we were in originally,
All right.
and which is what we are trying to get ourselves out of.
Stephen, I'm sure you would want to speak for yourself.
Kolani, I really don't need to defend myself against people who kind of fighting 1960s battles against communists. The Suppression of Communism Act has been abolished. The Suppression of Communism Act was also used against millions of people who were not communists.
But let's move into the other part that,
Kolani, the issue we really ought to be raising in response to these sorts of calls is that really what these calls are saying is that only some voices should be heard in South Africa, that only those people who are comfortable with the way in which our wealth is distributed at the moment should be heard. And that's part of the problem, because we hear all this stuff about populist voices, okay? Whether you agree with populist voices or not, we are a democracy, and we need to hear all voices. And those of us who are criticizing the current attitudes are not saying get rid of the middle class. I mean, that's a ludicrous idea. We're saying that everybody shares responsibility. We are saying that business also has power in this country. Professional people also have power in this country. And this constant process of shifting the entire buck onto only one actor when all actors are responsible is what has got us into difficulties.
Okay.
We need to hear all voices, and we need to accept that all actors are part of the problem and all actors are part of the solution.
Anonymous, good morning. Anonymous, are you there?
I would like to ask the Minister of Finance, why do they allow President Zuma to take 200 million rand and build himself a palace instead of trying to feed some of the poor people and trying to give them some homes that they can live in comfortably and stop this stealing and corruption of everything?
Anonymous, thank you very much, Minister.
Well, I said this on another radio station earlier this morning. Firstly, my colleagues in the Ministry of Public Works, the Minister and the Deputy Minister, are looking into this matter at the moment. And I hope that soon they would give the details to the public that they're entitled to. And I think it'll be unfair to use words like stealing until we can prove that somebody has stolen money, firstly. Secondly, I've asked for modesty in everything that we do in South Africa, in government and outside of government. But that's a long haul, and we'll get there. Thirdly, in terms of corruption within government, we must fight it. But let's keep reminding ourselves that corruption is like most, but not any dance. There's two who tangle. There are business people who are involved, and there are bureaucrats and politicians who are involved. The more important issue is, again, not to point a finger only at government, but to say that we're going to remove the culture of corruption. Whether it's from a traffic officer, whether it is somebody rigging tenders or anywhere else, and put in sufficient controls, but also change the mindsets of South Africa. So I completely agree with Anonymous. We need to fight this scourge, but we need all South Africans to contribute to that.
All right, let's take some more calls.
Could I just say something about that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, there was something very interesting happened on Friday evening, just to add up to that, and I'm watching it with some interest because I only read about it this morning, and that is that the summit which met on Friday evening apparently endorsed in principle the idea of a salary freeze for people at the top of the chain in this country.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, if that goes through, I think it will be a major breakthrough for South Africa. I'm a bit skeptical that it will go through, but the fact that people are talking about it is very important because it makes the obvious point. Of course, your caller is right. Of course, that kind of spending needs to be justified, and many of us will think it's unjustified. But so do executive salaries of 50, 60 million rand a month. And therefore, a year. Not even here do we have that a month. So do massive executive salaries, and so in some cases do the lifestyle of politicians and trade unionists.
Sure.
So that's taking collective responsibility. And if we start taking collective responsibility in this country, then we can really move forward.
Maybe on that point, Minister, you may want to come in, because I spoke to Sandile Zungu earlier on today. He says that the meat in the suggestions will come through on Wednesday. There's another meeting scheduled for Wednesday, and people will find out what then people think about this salary freeze.
Yes, I unfortunately was in Tokyo when all of this happened, but in principle I agree with the approach that was taken. Remember that it will be just one element of a broader range of agreements that we need to reach, but it will be an important signal that we are all willing to move in a more modest direction in terms of earnings and in terms of lifestyles, and stop the ostentatiousness that we see from certain sections, both within government and outside of government. Okay. And I hope that the summit, through which the President gave important leadership, is now able to build consensus amongst all the key role players on what we need to do and set a new tone in place of cooperation and doing concrete things that make a difference. All
right, let's go to Gift in the Eastern Cape. Hello, Gift.
Hi, Xolani, and hi to your guest in particular, Minister Groda. Look, Xolani, we must remember that these are the same credit rating agencies, Xolani, that rated AIG, AAA a day before its collapse. And secondly, Xolani, I think there's a historical evidence to support Standard & Poor's assessment that social tensions in the country will increase pressure on government spending. But also, I think the issues raised by Moody's were already being addressed through various government programs in the country. And I think the minister has alluded to that. But we must also acknowledge the fact that, that drivers of the downgrade have their roots in the protracted crisis in the Eurozone. And I think minister have to reflect on that one. But lastly, I think for Sarah, the U.S. is always rated AAA, despite its growing debt. That looks for now as if it can only be settled by printing money. So I always take these ratings with the reservation.
All right, let's get the minister to respond to that, because, Minister, whilst people can be skeptical about the ratings agencies, but the reality is that on the ground it has an impact on the investors and whether or not South Africa is an investment destination.
That's precisely why ratings agencies need to be a lot more cautious about the kind of commentary that they issue. And one of the observations that some critics make is that ratings agencies sometimes operate in a pro-cyclical way. In other words, when things are bad, you make it worse by moving in a particular direction. But secondly, in the South African case more specifically, we are not in an unsustainable debt environment. We're saying very clearly, and we've been saying it for the 3 years of this administration, that at most, as a result of responding to a crisis that had nothing to do with economic management in this country, at most, we will get to 40-41% debt GDP in our country. But Gift has an important point. Compare that to Italy, 200%, France almost 90%, UK 90%, Japan 200%, and so on. Why did the ratings agencies allow these kinds of debt burdens to accumulate over the last 15, 20 years in those societies? Is an interesting question to actually reflect upon. But where anybody makes a valid observation about something that we need to cure, something that we need to remedy, something that we need to act upon, we must keep our minds and ears open, receive that criticism or observation in the way it might or might not have been intended, but more importantly, do something to solve the problems that we are confronted with.
All right. Just talking about some of the points that they raised here, Dr. Friedman, I wanted your response to this one because they said, we see an increased likelihood that the ANC will take on board more populist elements for its policy framework in the lead up to the 2014 presidential elections. In our view, it may try to counter the perceived loss in legitimacy of South Africa's political and social institutions, as well as ensure the continued support of trade unions. And some may say, well, there is an issue of the legitimacy or illegitimacy of trade unions that arose as a result of these strikes.
Well, Kolani, actually, the voices we've been hearing in this society baying for the end of trade unions need to be watching very carefully what happened in these strikes, because they're actually sending the opposite message to that one. They're telling you that if trade unionism is not in touch with workers, if it doesn't say what workers want it to say, then we have a problem. Nobody believes that what's been happening in the platinum mines for the last few days, or people setting fires to trucks on public roads, is something we want in this country. Yeah. It's because trade unionism has lost touch with its members to a certain extent, and it needs to get in touch with that.
And the point is that we need stronger trade unionism in this country, because if you have stronger trade unionism, you have industrial peace. But the point that SNP is making here is that then at the conference, the ANC may be forced to say, what do we do in order to legitimize our alliance partners, in order to make them legitimate in the eyes of the workers once again, and therefore may even consider populist elements. This is what the argument is here. I know
that's what the argument is, but you see, it's all based, as I say, on this idea that there's this massive irrational group of people in the society, trying to nationalize everything and seize everybody's property, and it just happens to be false. You have middle-class groups manipulating, and the irony is that a lot of these people who phone up and defend the middle class don't realize that in many cases the middle-class groups are the people they phone up to complain about, like the African National Congress Youth League leadership, for example, who are very middle-class. The point is that what we need in this country is more say for people at the grassroots of this country, not less say, because people at the grassroots of this country live daily with the problems of the economy. They are not unrealistic, they are not stupid, and they know when people are saying things in their name which are not true. Okay. So the problem I have with the rating agencies is not that they say we have a problem. Of course we have a problem. We have a whole series of problems. It's that they get the problem wrong, Kolani, because in a sense, part of the solution is for them the problem. The solution is to hear more voices from the bottom of our society, not to shut them up in the hope that they'll go away.
Let's take some more calls here. John in Cape Town. Hello, John.
Yeah, thank you, Kolani, for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
The issue of the rating is happening all over the world. And our economy, what is the impact of that? Because our economy is always built on the European Union. And if there is a crisis, obviously affect our economy and our country. But who is the most affected? The bottom, the working class. And the issue of the ANC economic policies, the Freedom Charter is not a policy. And the working class have, since 94, since 90, where were they before and where are they now? And before the 1994 elections, were they privatization or not? The ANC and the NPF agree with privatization, and privatization is not the answer for any economy in the world. Thank you.
That's John in Cape Town. Yaj is also in Cape Town. Hello, Yaj.
Hi, morning, Kalani.
Hi, welcome.
Good morning to the Minister and your guest. We must admit, and the Minister must also not shift responsibility. There's too much bashing of middle class and the rating agencies, etc. The fact is the global economic system is broken, and very few countries can grow themselves out of this problem because we've come to the end of cheap oil globally. And this is the underlying factor. We've got a debt-based money system that is bankrupt. This government hasn't done enough to implement alleviating policies for the poor in terms of a basic income. Secondly, we need to be taxing speculation and financial transactions instead of taxing income and value added. We need to start establishing state banks to fund infrastructure development in terms of renewable energy and public transport. which is not being done adequately enough. And we need to stop the middle class are indebted to the banks who create money through fractional reserve banking, creating money out of thin air. Now, there needs to be a paradigm shift in how we raise funding and credit for investment in infrastructure.
All right. That's Yaj in Cape Town. Sias is also in Cape Town. Hello, Sias.
Hi. Good day, gentlemen. I just want to know if the government has and the leaders of our country has any backbone at this stage. I mean, they're definitely not taking any action or making any public statements or condemning any of these mining actions. And I would just like to know from the minister if they would condemn people not paying tax anymore, because obviously the money is spend it wrongly, and they're not taking any action against these militant ways that people fight for higher salaries.
All right.
I mean.
All right, the minister will respond to you, Sias, in a minute. But let me take a commercial break. We've also got Gerald in Durban and a couple of other people. Emails, gwala@sabc.co.za. SMS is at 34701.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Right, let me ask the minister to respond to some of the calls. Sias, Yaj and John, Minister.
Yeah, let me thank all of them for very important contributions that they've made. Sias, I hope that I can reassure you that government on many occasions, and will do it again now through my voice, has condemned violence in any form, in any strike, coming from any quarter. And it's completely unacceptable that we destroy property in order to fight for what we think are our causes. And indeed, we have a backbone. You can come and have a look at mine anytime that you are available. And what we want is for people to sit around the table, use the labor relations system, improve it as it certainly needs to be, to help us solve some of the problems. Yaj, nice to hear you again. At least I hear you 2 or 3 times a year, so that's very good. We are not shirking any responsibility whatsoever. We've said on many occasions, and we agree with you completely, that what we see around the globe is a disastrous situation. What we see in terms of lack of action in certain economies, which are very large and have huge what we call spillover effects on other economies, is unacceptable. And in fact, over the past few days in Tokyo, we've been saying this to them. Basic income, we do have some form of it. We can't afford all of it at this point in time. But the key issue is not about basic income only. It's about how do we create economic activity that people can get involved in and earn a living from, including decent jobs as well, and that's something that all of us need to work at. Speculation, lots of us are very critical of speculation, which gives rise to price hikes and so on. And there's certainly a need for a paradigm shift, and both Stephen and I have been essentially arguing for that. We need to see things, for example, democracy and voices coming from different quarters differently from the way we would normally see it within these sorts of quarters in South Africa. The poor do need to be heard.
All right.
Middle class is an important actor. John, indeed, the working class has been affected, and there's a connection between what happens in Europe and South Africa, as many of us said. And we don't live in an isolated world. We live in a very integrated world.
Sure.
But all of this does not mean that South Africa and its policymakers and people must sit inactive and paralyzed. It means we must get our act together and use the opportunities that are around us to create a better life for all of us.
All right. Dr. Friedman, let me start off by reading this email from SIG for you. He says, don't blame Standard & Poor's for our self-destruction. Minister Gordon and Professor Friedman forget that the Arab Spring has shifted to South Africa, except that the demonstrators are not driven by democracy, but by the mafia intimidation and murder in the populist revolution incited by Julius Malema's ANC mafia, with funding of billions from the looting of Limpopo. So we'll get a response for SIG in a minute, but let me take Glenn and George first. Good morning, Glenn.
Hello.
Hi, Glenn.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Look, this is an exquisite conning of the workers. What we've seen happening is dragging us towards bankruptcy, carefully coordinated violence, states of emergency, martial law, and so on. We're all human beings. Let's edit out the vicious.
Yeah.
Let them start union and boss meetings with a handshake and a prayer, and get out of debt so that we're independent of alien bankers and godless corporations. Then we can go forward. But our constitution's worth nothing if we're in debt. So I'd like our Minister dealing with finance to put our labour reservoir to work, please. They're dying to do it, and it's actually unconstitutional to keep it, not in the interests of the public or the nation to keep them from working.
All right, that's Edwin. Thank you very much, Edwin and George. There is also Sebastian in Cape Town. Hello, Sebastian.
Yes, good morning to you. We certainly have many problems which can be addressed by our population using their votes properly. But I want to ask whether the ratings agencies are actually treating us on exactly the same criteria as other countries. For example, the US and Australia have been running large current account deficits for decades. So are we treated the same way as them when we have a current account deficit? I'd like to place emphasis on exactly the point that the Minister has placed. The crux of the issue is, will the overseas investor get their money back or not? And I see no reason why they won't. We are a country with massive reserves of minerals backing our operations. There are two kinds of investors. The one is just investing money to get an interest return. At the moment, they're getting much higher than they will overseas and tax-free. So is there any rationale for them having to get an extra premium? It's a 0-1 sum. Either you think the country's going bankrupt and you don't lend, or you do lend. And if you do lend, why should this downgrading just enable everyone to demand an unjustified
Sebastian, I really have got to get responses from my two guests, but I need to read this email just in wrapping up then, Professor Stephen Friedman. It comes from Matthew Blatchford at the University of Fort Hare, who says, unfortunately, our budget deficit is unsustainable, and the plans to overspend on infrastructure development over the next decade will render this still less sustainable. Therefore, the only thing saving us from bankruptcy is the low interest rate on our ballooning national debt. Unfortunately, Dr. Gordon's austerity program, a kind of stealth gear, is slowing economic growth, so that will not rescue us, especially since, unlike the situation during gear itself, the global economy is in shambles. A number of points. The last one says, some of our own bankers, notably Marcus, the governor of the Reserve Bank, who used to work for the notoriously corrupt international bank Barclays, are evidently working for the foreign banks rather than for the country's own interests. It's a very long email, but at the end it says, no surprises anywhere then. Let me start with you then, Stephen Friedman, just wrapping up for me.
Yeah, Kolani, look, I'm not on this program going to persuade the people who want to bring apartheid back under a new flag that they're wrong. So let's move to the more interesting comments. I think Yash has raised some very interesting points. We do need to look at new policy proposals. However, I think part of the message we're trying to convey this morning, it's not only about policy proposals, it's also about how business, labour, government and citizens relate to each other, and we need to look at that. And secondly, obviously, the question Yash needs to consider and we need to debate is how will those proposals of his affect the fact, will we have continued investment? Will it deter economic activity? Because contrary to a lot of the callers, what we're saying this morning is not that we need to abolish the middle class. It's saying that we need a balance. And if you come with economic reform proposals, we always need to look at whether those can be achieved in a way in which we continue to have investment and we continue to have growth in this country, because obviously without that, nothing can happen.
So much input then, Minister. How do you wrap it up for me?
Well, on the question of the middle class, our aim is that in 20, 25 years' time, all of us are middle class. Not as a small group of people who enjoy privileges and the vast majority without privileges. The next thing is, how do we achieve that? And there's a million ideas through which we can actually do it. But the key is for us to take collective responsibility and stop believing that any one of us has the total answer. The third is that we do require, I think, a greater policy eclecticism, meaning be open to new ideas, be open to new ways of looking at things. We're living not just in an uncertain world, but in a world in which the old answers don't necessarily provide the solutions for today. And we've got to, and nobody, I do a lot of traveling and a lot of talking. Nobody can give you a new textbook to get out of the current mess in which the global economy is in. Sebastian, I think, is completely on the mark. In the last year, we've had over 80 billion rands of inflows into this country, but largely because of what Sebastian says. People get a good return on their money through our investing in our bonds. As far as Matthew is concerned, let's find some time to talk, Matthew. I think we live on slightly different planets. We need to just reconcile our orbits so that we can get onto the same page. But Finally, to you and your listeners, Tolani, we should be a nation that's very hopeful about the future. There's lots of things that are going for us, and let's focus on the things that are going for us and build a better future for all of us.
Right. Thank you very much, Minister. I really thank you. Fantastic discussion. So much coming through out of this discussion, and clearly so much to discuss going into the future. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, as well as Dr. Stephen Friedman, I thank you for your time. I thank the team who put it all together for us this day. It is now just after 9 o'clock, and that means time for Morning Talk until tomorrow. Cheers from all of us here at AM Live. Here at AM Live. Here at AM Live. Here at AM Live. Here at AM Live.